You look at companies like Google, Intel, uh, organizations like the Gates Foundation. They achieve some pretty extraordinary things, right? It feels almost, well, inevitable
Well,
sometimes.
yeah, like it's just pure vision driving it all.
Exactly.
But is it?
It can feel that way from the outside, for
Sure.
sure. But often, what looks like magic is actually a really powerful system, a way of turning that big vision into, tangible results.
A system, like discipline.
Yeah, discipline, focus, and alignment. It's quite methodical when you look under the hood.
Okay, and that is exactly our deep dive today. We're peeling back the layers on one of the most effective management methodologies out there designed to do just that. Objectives and key results, OKRs.
That's right. And we'll also look at their critical partners, the things that help build a culture where those OKRs can actually thrive. Conversations, feedback, and recognition, or CFRs.
Right, CFRs. Now, you've given us a fantastic stack of sources for this. John Doerr's a big book, Measure What Matters. That's obviously a cornerstone here. It really is.
Yeah.
But we also have some great articles and summaries that get into the nitty-gritty of how these ideas actually play out in the real world, which is important.
Definitely. So our mission in this deep dive is to unpack all this material, grab the most important nuggets for you, the listener, and really get to grips with what OKRs and CFRs are, how they kind of knit together.
And the potentially transformative impact they can have, yeah.
Yeah. We'll trace their roots, right, from the pressure cooker at Intel
Andy Grove.
to their explosive growth in Silicon Valley giants like Google. We'll see how they're used by these huge humanitarian powerhouses tackling global challenges and even, in smaller startups just finding their feet.
And we'll cover the core concepts, why they sometimes fail, which is just as important to understand, and how they connect directly to things like company culture and, keeping people engaged and motivated.
It's a system that, well, it helps you measure what really matters. Let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
So let's start right at the beginning. What are OKRs at their core, like the basic idea?
Okay. Think of them as a goal-setting framework, but with a very specific purpose. They're designed to create what some of the sources call a golden thread.
A golden thread.
Yeah, like this visible connection linking, every activity happening across a business directly back to its highest level strategic priority.
Ah, okay. So it's making sure everyone understands how their day-to-day stuff actually contributes to the big picture.
Precisely. No more wondering, why am I doing this? Hopefully.
Okay. And the name itself, OKR, tells you the two main parts, the objective and the key results.
Exactly. The objective is the what. It's the big goal, the significant thing you want to achieve. It should be ideally kind of inspirational. It sets the direction, that target on the horizon.
Significant, inspirational, got it. And the key results.
The key results are the how you'll measure if you're actually getting there. This is where it gets really specific. They need to be measurable, trackable, basically proof.
Undeniable progress, kind of.
That's the idea. It's the evidence that you're making headway towards that objective. And a really crucial insight from the sources here, especially when we think about culture and driving real change, is that OKRs seem to be most impactful when they're applied at the team level, not primarily the individual level.
Well, interesting. Why team level?
Well, it creates shared ownership, you see. It helps teams understand how their collective efforts working together actually move the needle on those bigger company-wide goals.
Yeah.
It fosters collaboration.
That makes a lot of sense. It shifts the focus from, how did I do on my checklist to how do we do on moving towards this important goal?
Exactly. Team progress on strategic goals. Now, the sources talk about 5 key elements that OKRs kind of build up, and then these 4 superpowers they unlock.
Okay, let's get into those. What are the foundational 5 elements first? What do OKRs create?
Right. So when they're done well, OKRs foster purpose and clarity through these 5 things: focus, autonomy, alignment, accountability, and transparency.
Focus, autonomy, alignment, accountability, transparency.
Those are like the building blocks. They enable the real impact.
And John Doerr frames that impact using what he calls the 4 superpowers of OKRs. Let's take the first one. Focus and commit to priorities.
Yeah.
How do OKRs actually help organizations do that? Because saying focus is easy, right?
It is easy to say, but OKRs force the hard choices. You simply can't do everything. They demand prioritization, especially from leadership. The mantra here is really less is more.
Less is more. So limit the number of goals.
Yes. The usual guidance is maybe 3 to 5 objectives at most for a given period, and then maybe 3 to 5 key results for each of those objectives. Any more than that, and you lose the focus.
Right, you're spreading yourself too thin.
Exactly. This focus ensures teams aren't scattered and are genuinely concentrating their energy on what's decided to be most important right now.
That reminds me of the story about Remind, the communication app startup. The co-founder, Brett Koff, he talked about how implementing OKRs was just essential for them to gain focus, especially during rapid growth.
Yeah, because it forced them to limit what they were trying to achieve all at once. It brings a certain discipline to that ambition, doesn't it?
It really does. And that focus, that discipline, it seems like it feeds directly into the second superpower, align and connect for teamwork.
It does. And this is where that element of transparency becomes incredibly powerful. The idea is that OKR should be visible to everyone.
Everyone, like from the CEO down to junior staff.
Ideally, yes.
Yeah.
Because that visibility helps connect the dots for people. When you can see what other teams are prioritizing, what their goals are, it naturally fosters collaboration. It helps prevent misunderstandings or teams working at cross purposes.
Okay, so it binds those daily activities we talked about earlier straight back to the company's overall vision.
Exactly. And there's this research cited that's pretty stark, actually. It said something like only 7% of employees fully understand their company's strategy. 7%.
Wow, that low. That's a huge gap.
It's massive. So transparent OKRs are a direct tool to try and close that alignment gap, make strategy clear and visible.
Okay, transparency is key. But the sources also warn against something called strict grand cascading. What's that about? What's the danger there?
Ah, right. Cascading. That's the sort of old school, purely top-down way of doing it. Leadership sets goals, and then they just get pushed down layer by layer, team by team, often without much input.
And the problem with that is?
Well, a few things. You lose agility, for one. It's hard to pivot or adapt if everything is rigidly locked in from the top. It can also marginalize contributors, lower down. Their valuable insights might not get factored in.
Okay.
And it can create these really stiff, one-dimensional links between teams, which can actually hinder genuine cross-functional work, you know?
So the alternative is more fluid, more give and take.
Exactly. It's often called a bottoms-up approach, or at least finding a balance. Employees are encouraged to propose their own objectives that connect upwards to the higher-level company goals.
So it blends that alignment from the top with autonomy and input from below.
Precisely. Think about Google work. Gmail famously started as a 20% time side project. That's bottom-up innovation. Transparency enables that by letting people see the bigger picture and figure out where they can contribute creatively.
That Google example is pretty powerful. And that connection, that alignment, it also helps break down those silos between different departments or teams, doesn't it?
It absolutely should. I mean, modern work is so interconnected. Companies like Intuit, for example, they used OKRs across their global IT department, specifically to boost transparency and connection.
How did that work?
Well, it linked the work of these dispersed teams directly to larger strategic goals, reducing those organizational silos and kind of forcing more horizontal connections. MyFitnessPal also found that after they were acquired, using OKRs and having regular integration meetings tied to them was essential for aligning efforts across different teams as they scaled up.
Right, getting everyone pulling in the same direction. Okay, that's align and connect, superpower number 3.
Yep.
Track for accountability. This sounds like where the measurable part of key results really comes into play.
It does. OKRs aren't meant to be set it and forget it goals you write down in January and look at again in December. They're living documents. Tracking means regular check-ins.
How regular?
Ideally, weekly. Think of it like a fitness tracker for your team's or company's goals. It keeps momentum going, keeps the goals top of mind, and crucially lets you spot problems or, opportunities early on.
And I imagine as you get bigger, you probably need tools for this. Trying to track everything in spreadsheets must get messy.
Oh, definitely. For anything more than a handful of people, the sources suggest cloud-based OKR software really helps with transparency and efficiency compared to, say, shared Word docs. Some organizations even appoint OKR shepherds.
OKR shepherds.
Yeah, people whose role includes championing the process, making sure the tracking is happening consistently, helping teams if they get stuck, just keeping the system healthy.
What happens at the end of the OKR cycle? Like end of the quarter?
Yeah, the wrap-up.
Yeah.
There's a crucial post-mortem or review. Scoring the KRs, do we hit them, miss them, by how much? And doing a team self-assessment is vital.
But it's not just about grading.
No, not at all. It's primarily about learning. What worked, what didn't, why. It's about reflection and improving for the next cycle, not just judgment.
And can you change OKRs mid-cycle if things change?
You can. They need to be flexible to a degree. If the market shifts drastically or a core assumption proves wrong, you might need to adjust. But the sources generally advise against ditching them too easily just because they're hard. Even unachieved goals offer valuable lessons.
Makes sense. Learn from the misses, too.
And hey, don't forget celebrating progress along the way. Recognizing milestones keeps people motivated.
That tracking and accountability piece, it feels fundamental to the Gates Foundation story you mentioned, managing that massive, like, $20 billion effort against diseases.
Wow. Absolutely. Patty Stonesifer apparently brought OKRs in, inspired by her time on Amazon's board, precisely to bring structure and measurable accountability to that huge undertaking.
How did they measure something like fighting malaria?
They used specific, if complex, metrics like Daly's disability-adjusted life years, saved to measure impact, and help prioritize where their resources would do the most good. It wasn't just about feeling good, it was about data.
And Bill Gates himself was a proponent.
Very much so. He emphasized how OKRs provided clarity distinguishing the mission from specific objectives, discipline, to reallocate funds based on data, confidence in their decisions because they were data-driven, and clear accountability. Apparently, he even used the framework to push back on grant requests that lacked clear, measurable objectives. How will we know if this works? Kind of thing.
Wow. And then there's Intel's famous Operation Crush back in the day. That sounds like tracking under intense pressure.
Oh, a classic example. Late 70s, Intel was in a real fight with Motorola. Andy Grove used OKRs to rally the entire company with this incredibly fierce focus. The objective was literally crush Motorola. Yeah, and they tracked progress obsessively using what they called an as measured by AMB framework. They were laser focused on achieving design wins for their new 8086 chip. That intense focus and rigorous tracking is credited with helping them win that battle.
Okay, that's a powerful example of Trek for accountability, which brings us nicely to the fourth and final superpower, stretch for amazing. This is about pushing beyond the safe, comfortable goals.
Exactly. It's about setting ambitious, maybe even audacious goals. Jim Collins called them BHA's big, hairy, audacious goals. The research seems to back this up. Aiming higher often correlates with higher performance and more engagement. OKRs give you a structure to actually pursue those bolder targets without, everything falling apart.
So does that mean you don't necessarily expect to hit 100% on every single key result?
That's a really key nuance, particularly popularized by Google. They talk about having two types of OKRs. First, committed OKRs.
Committed.
Yeah, these are the non-negotiable, must-hit 100% goals. Things like meeting sales targets, compliance, maybe core operational stuff. You commit, you deliver.
Okay. And the second type?
Those are aspirational or stretch goals. Here, aiming for, say, 70 or 80% achievement is actually considered a success.
Why only 70%? Why not aim for 100?
Because setting the bar that high forces innovation. It pushes teams to think differently, to try new things, to really stretch beyond what they thought was possible. If you always hit 100%, maybe your goals aren't ambitious enough.
Ah, okay. Like Larry Page's 10x thinking at Google, aim for 10 times improvement, not just 10%.
Exactly that mindset. It embodies stretch thinking. It's not about incremental improvements. It's about breakthroughs.
Can you give an example of a stretch goal in action?
Sure. The story of Google Chrome's early days is often cited. Sundar Pichai's team apparently set a stretch OKR for active users. I think it was 20 million in the first year. That was a huge number back then. Definitely not a safe bet.
Right, that sounds like a real stretch.
It was, and hitting it, or even getting close, required them to innovate not just on the browser itself, but heavily on distribution and marketing too. It forced a broader strategy. The YouTube team also famously used stretched goals, like aiming for 1 billion hours of watch time per day by 2016. That required immense focus and execution across many areas.
Okay, so these superpowers, focus, align, track, stretch, they clearly impact how goals are set and achieved. But it feels like they go deeper, like they fundamentally shift how an organization feels and operates, the culture.
They absolutely do, and that's a critical point the sources make. OKRs aren't just a performance management tool, or they shouldn't be. When used effectively, they can be a powerful engine for transforming and reinforcing a positive company culture.
How does that connection work exactly?
Well, think about what drives employee engagement. People want clarity, they want to feel connected to a purpose, they want to see how their work matters. A Gallup report mentioned in the sources highlighted that employees really crave better engagement and culture, and clearer goals are a big piece of that puzzle.
So OKRs address that directly.
They can, yeah. Transparency, alignment, feeling a sense of purpose. These are key engagement drivers, and they are things that well-implemented OKRs are designed to foster.
What about the sense of belonging? Does that fit in?
That's important too, and it's something leaders need to be really conscious of when rolling out OKRs. While the system provides clarity, you need to make sure all employees feel connected and valued, even if their specific team isn't setting, say, a top-level company OKR.
And how do you do that?
Well, one crucial point the sources strongly caution against is leaders just dictating OKRs top-down for everyone below them, that grand cascade thing again.
Right, you lose buy-in.
Exactly. To feel truly invested, people need some agency. Ideally, employees should have end-to-end accountability on projects or initiatives tied to the OKRs they're working on. They need to feel ownership.
So does a certain type of culture need to be in place before you can even successfully implement OKRs? Like, do you need the right soil first?
Some sources definitely suggest that. Foundational elements like a baseline level of accountability, transparency, and a genuinely collaborative spirit might be prerequisites.
Is there an example of that?
Yeah, the Lumos health tech story is quite stark. Their first attempt at OKRs apparently kind of flopped. It wasn't until they did significant cultural groundwork, leadership changes, restructuring, really fostering what they called brutal transparency without judgment, that the culture shifted enough for OKRs to actually take root and be effective.
Wow. So culture had to change first. But can culture also support OKRs once they're in place?
Oh, absolutely. It's definitely a two-way street, a virtuous cycle, ideally. Andy Grove himself noted that a strong corporate culture streamlines decision-making, which obviously makes executing on goals much easier.
Okay.
And remember Google's Project Aristotle study about what makes teams effective.
Vaguely, yeah. Psychological safety was one, right?
Exactly. Psychological safety, clarity, meaning, dependability, impact, those were the key elements they found. And well-implemented OKRs can directly support and reinforce several of those, especially clarity, meaning, and impact.
That makes sense.
Coursera, the online learning platform, is another example. They apparently tied their early OKR adoption directly to their core company values, using the system to build transparency and alignment that was explicitly rooted in their mission from the get-go.
Okay, so OKRs are clearly powerful. How do they stack up against other goal-setting methods people might already be using, like SMART goals? Are they competitors or complementary?
That's a common question. The biggest differentiator, really, is that central link back to the overarching strategic priorities, that golden thread we talked about.
Right, and SMART goals don't necessarily have that.
Not inherently, no. SMART goal-specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound are fantastic for defining clear metrics for individual tasks, or maybe specific KPIs, key performance indicators. They're very useful tactical tools.
But they might lack that connection, that motivational link back to the company's big vision or destination.
Precisely. They might tell you what to do very clearly, but not necessarily why it matters in the grand scheme of things. The sources generally position OKRs as being best for driving significant growth, change, and innovation, the stuff that really moves the company forward strategically.
Whereas SMART goals might be better for
maybe for measuring established KPIs, managing business as usual tasks, or setting individual performance goals within a specific role.
So can you use both? Can they coexist in an organization?
Absolutely, they can, and often do. The key, according to the sources, is just being super clear within your organization about which framework you're using for what purpose. Avoid confusion. OKRs for the big strategic pushes, maybe SMART goals for individual projects, or standard operational metrics.
Clarity is key again. Okay, now let's bring in the other acronym. CFR is conversations, feedback, and recognition. The sources really emphasize these aren't just like separate HR things. They're integral to making the whole OKR system actually work.
Yes, this is the human engine that powers the OKRs. You can have the best goals in the world, but without the human element, they fall flat.
And what's the problem they're solving? Like, compared to traditional performance reviews?
Well, the sources are pretty critical of the old annual review model. They argue it's often ineffective, incredibly time-consuming, doesn't really capture true performance accurately throughout the year, and frankly, it tends to de-emphasize the ongoing human relationship and dialogue between managers and their team members.
Right, that once-a-year awkward conversation.
Pretty much. CFRs offer a much more continuous, dynamic, and hopefully more human alternative.
Okay, so break down that CFR engine for us. What are the components?
Right, three parts. Conversations. These are those regular, authentic one-on-one meetings between a manager and a team member. They should be focused on progress towards goals like OKRs, any challenges, development opportunities, coaching, that kind of thing.
Regular, authentic conversations.
Yeah.
Got it. What's next?
Feedback. And this is crucial. It needs to be ongoing, bi-directional, meaning employees give feedback to managers too specific and happen in real time or close to it, not saved up for months.
Bidirectional, ongoing.
Okay.
And the R?
Recognition. This is about acknowledging contributions, both big and small, publicly when appropriate. Tying that recognition back to the company goals or values helps reinforce what matters. It's about building a culture of appreciation.
Okay, so let me see if I've got this. OKRs give you the clear, measurable strategic goals. And CFRs provide the how and the human support, the dialogue, the feedback, the encouragement needed to actually achieve those goals.
That's a perfect way to put it. CFRs are the channels. They're the dialogue, the coaching, the check-ins, the high fives. They channel the energy and focus generated by the OKRs into the daily work and interactions within the organization. They make the OKR system live and breathe.
Okay, and this leads us to that absolutely critical point that the sources seem to shout from the rooftops.
Yeah.
OKRs and CFRs together should not be tied directly to individual compensation or promotion decisions. Why is that so important?
Because it breaks the system. It's so easily misunderstood and misused, apparently. If you tie OKR achievement directly to someone's bonus or raise, what happens?
Well, people will set easier goals they know they can hit 100% on.
Right.
To maximize their payout.
Exactly. You completely kill the incentive for setting ambitious stretch goals. Why aim for that 70% success on a really hard goal if you know hitting 100% on a safe, easy, sandbagged goal gets you a bigger reward? It stifles innovation and ambition.
It incentivizes playing it safe instead of reaching higher.
Precisely. So the sources are crystal clear. OKRs and CFRs are tools for performance development. They help individuals and teams grow by focusing on how they demonstrate values and behaviors while working towards the goals.
Development, not evaluation for pay.
Right. That's distinct from performance management, which is the more formal process of evaluating individuals for compensation, promotion, etc. It's a really crucial distinction to maintain the integrity of both processes.
Okay, super important point. So what are some best practices for actually making CFRs work well alongside OKRs day to day?
Well, consistency is key. Having a regular schedule for those conversations, one-on-ones weekly, bi-weekly, whatever works, but stick to it. Use that time explicitly to reiterate priorities and discuss progress against the OKRs.
Makes sense.
Active listening from the manager is vital, obviously. Maybe co-creating the agenda for the one-on-one so they feel relevant and useful to both people. When giving feedback, the advice is to keep it focused on the goal or the task, not making it personal about the individual.
Focus on the work, not the person.
Yes, and encourage everyone, peers too, not just managers, to give and receive feedback in a timely manner. Don't wait months. Quick feedback allows for quick course correction.
That Adobe story seems like a fantastic case study on the power of this continuous approach, even separate from OKRs initially. They completely ditched their old annual reviews.
They did. They moved to this system called check-in, which was all about regular dialogue between managers and employees, setting quarterly goals, and providing ongoing feedback. And crucially, they got rid of performance ratings and rankings.
And the result?
Pretty dramatic, according to the reports. Reduced employee attrition, significantly increased engagement, people felt more valued, more trusted, less like they were just a number in a force ranking.
And Zune Pizza, the robot pizza place, they use both together.
Yeah, they're cited as an example of using OKRs and CFRs in tandem. They found it effective not just for alignment across the company, but also for developing their leaders, empowering individual contributors through more disciplined thinking, and fostering collaboration, basically using the whole system.
Okay. We've actually woven in quite a few of these real-world examples as we've gone through the superpowers and CFRs, which really helps show these aren't just, abstract theories.
Right. I mean, from the intense focus at Intel during Operation Crush
To Google, using OKRs, basically from day one, to guide that insane growth and foster innovations like Chrome and YouTube.
To the Gates Foundation, applying that rigorous OKR discipline, using metrics like day lives to manage billions, tackling global health issues.
Startups like finding focus during rapid scaling, or Nuna using OKRs to stay committed to a tough mission, like landing that big Medicaid contract.
Yeah, or established companies like Intuit using them to connect global teams, or Adobe transforming engagement by focusing on the CFR side.
It really shows the breadth of application.
Exactly. These aren't just buzzwords. They're actual systems used by organizations big and small, for-profit, nonprofit, in wildly different sectors, all trying to turn aspirations into reality.
Which brings us neatly to nonprofits.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Gates Foundation. Bono's One campaign was in the sources too. Can OKRs really work just as well for organizations where the primary driver isn't profit?
The answer from the sources seems to be a resounding absolutely. I mean, every organization, regardless of its tax status, needs a way to translate its strategy and mission into actionable goals and then track progress towards them.
But the context is different, isn't it?
Oh, for sure. Profit isn't the main metric, although financial sustainability fundraising grants is often a critical key result for nonprofits. They also often face really difficult moral dilemmas when resources are limited.
Like deciding who to help or which problem to tackle first.
Exactly. It might shift from where can we do good to the much harder question of where do we need to do the most good right now with the resources we have. OKRs can provide a framework to navigate those competing priorities transparently and make focused strategic decisions.
And nonprofits often have these massive, almost overwhelming long-term missions, right? Ending poverty, curing a disease,
Yeah.
things that take decades. How do you fit that into quarterly or annual OKR cycles?
That's a great question. The concept of North Star OKRs comes up. It's about translating that huge multi-decade mission into more actionable annual and quarterly steps. You need stepping stones.
Like with Bono's One campaign.
Right. Their overall mission is enormous, ending extreme poverty and preventable disease. But they use structured goals, very much like OKRs, to focus on specific, achievable campaigns along the way. First, it was debt relief for poor nations, then focusing on access to anti-AIDS drugs. These were critical first steps towards a larger mission. They even called their approach factivism, bringing data and analysis to their activism.
Factivism, I like that. And what about fundraising itself? Is that typically an objective for a nonprofit?
Fundraising is obviously critical for sustainability and growth, but usually a revenue target itself would be a key result, not the objective. The objective would provide the context. Maybe it's expand our program reach in region X or secure long-term funding partners for initiative Y. The KRs would then measure the funding needed and track progress towards securing it.
Okay, that makes sense. The objective is the why, the KR is the how much. One last thing on nonprofits. What if their goal involves something largely outside their direct control? Like, getting a government to change a policy or pass a specific bill. How do you set an OKR for that?
That's a common challenge for advocacy groups. You can still state the desired outcome as the objective achieve passage of Bill X, but the key is that your key results have to be focused on the things that are within your sphere of influence and control.
Like the inputs, not the final outcome.
Exactly. What groundwork are you laying? How many stakeholder meetings are you holding? How many coalition partners are you securing? What research reports are you publishing? How many citizens are you mobilizing? You define KRs around those controllable actions that build a foundation for the ultimate success.
So it's like training for the Super Bowl. You can't guarantee you'll win the game.
But you can control your preparation, your training regimen, your strategy development, your team cohesion. You focus on executing the things that give you the best possible chance of success. OKRs help nonprofits focus their limited resources on building that solid foundation for impact, even when the final outcome isn't solely in their hands.
That's a great analogy. Okay, so bringing this all back together, this deep dive into OKRs and CFRs, it really shows they're much more than just, corporate jargon or the latest management fad.
Definitely not. They represent a structured and, when done right, a powerful way to achieve clarity across an organization, to maintain intense focus on what matters, to align everyone's efforts, drive accountability, and importantly, cultivate a positive, engaged, and high-performing culture.
And their applicability seems really broad, from the world's biggest tech companies and ambitious startups to vital nonprofits tackling humanity's biggest challenges, even potentially for individuals setting personal goals.
Absolutely. These frameworks provide a roadmap, a system for measuring what truly matters and making extraordinary things happen. It's about turning intention into results.
So, maybe a final thought for you, the listener. Consider the goal setting in your own work, or your organization, or even your personal life. Is it really clear? Is it shared? Does it genuinely focus on and measure what truly matters?
Yeah. Perhaps reflecting on some of these examples, the focus of Intel, the stretch of Google, the accountability of the Gates Foundation, the cultural shift at Adobe, perhaps that can spark some ideas for setting and achieving your own extraordinary goals to come.